Oliver Twist. 1.
Oliver Twist was born in a poorhouse, a place where only the poorest people lived. The people there wore rags and were forced to work hard. In return, they received shelter and meals of soup and bread. People in the poorhouse were weak, painfully thin, and often sick. Many were unable to survive. In the 19th century, it was not unusual for children to die young. It was a miracle that Oliver even breathed after he was born. His mother was ill and lay in bed. She asked to hold her child before dying. Holding the baby boy up to her pale lips, she kissed him on the head. Shortly afterward, Oliver's mother passed away. The nurse said that nobody knew anything about the woman, not even her name. And so a name was made up for the baby. The orphan was called Oliver Twist. During the first year, Oliver was kept inside the poorhouse. Afterward, he was sent to stay with a woman who looked after orphans for the poorhouse. Here he was treated badly. On his 9th birthday, Oliver was taken back to the poorhouse. Later, he went to live with an undertaker and his wife. They also didn't treat Oliver very nicely. Oliver was unhappy, so he decided to run away to London. Although it was winter, Oliver had few clothes. Oliver walked a long way and had to sleep outside at night. He suffered great cold and hunger during his journey. Oliver met people who were cruel, but some people were kind and gave him food. Not far from the center of London, Oliver noticed a boy staring at him. "What's troubling you?" the boy asked. Although quite dirty, the boy wore a man's coat and a top hat. "I'm tired and hungry," Oliver told him. The boy bought some ham and bread for Oliver. He was called the Dodger. "I will introduce you to an elderly gentleman in London," said the Dodger. "You can stay with him for free." The house was dark and dirty. An old man called Fagin was cooking sausages. He looked like a villain. Some boys sat nearby smoking clay pipes and drinking spirits. Fagin and the boys were kind to Oliver. "We are pleased to meet you, Oliver," Fagin said with a bow. He gave Oliver plenty of food. He also made Oliver drink some gin. Oliver quickly fell into a deep sleep. He was carried over to a sack to sleep on. As Oliver slowly woke up from his deep sleep the following morning, he became aware that only Fagin was in the house. The old man was whistling to himself while making coffee. Fagin looked over at Oliver and called out his name. Oliver pretended to be asleep. Fagin smiled and locked the door of the house. Through half-closed eyes, Oliver watched him lift up some floorboards and take out a box. Fagin put the box on a table and opened it. He took out of the box a gold watch that sparkled with jewels. "Clever boys," Fagin said to himself. He then put the watch back in the box and took out some rings, bracelets, and other jewelry. "Execution is good. 5 men dead, and so they'll never be able to speak a word and cause trouble," laughed Fagin. It was then that Fagin noticed that Oliver was awake. Fagin realized that the boy had been watching him. "What are you doing?" Fagin shouted. waving a kitchen knife at Oliver. "I'm sorry, sir, but I could not sleep any longer," said Oliver. "You weren't awake an hour ago, were you?" asked Fagin. "Oh, no, sir. Not at all, sir." Fagin told Oliver that the jewels belonged to him. "May I get up now, sir?" Oliver asked. "Of course, my boy," Fagin replied. When Oliver turned around after getting the water to wash his face, the box had disappeared. Soon the Dodger came back with a boy called Charlie Bates, and they all sat down to eat breakfast. "I hope you have been working hard," said Fagin. "We certainly have," the Dodger said. "As hard as nails," added Charlie. Fagin looked happy. "Good boys. So, what have you got?" asked Fagin. The Dodger handed Fagin 2 wallets. Charlie gave him some handkerchiefs. Fagin, Charlie, and the Dodger laughed and joked, saying that they should teach Oliver how to make handkerchiefs too. Oliver did not understand what was going on.